Hey everybody, Boris last week at Forex. Welcome to the weekly technicals for the commodity dollars for Aussie dollar, dollar CAD, and Kiwi dollar for June 4th, June 8th, 2018. And the story in the COM dollar land is that we had relative weakness this week. They actually sold off against the dollar at the end of the week, surprisingly, but I think it's essentially a little bit of profit taking as the week wore on. We pretty much stayed true to the ranges that we had last week. We tested the upper end of it and it just kind of backed off. And the Aussie dollar, the 76 turned out to be a pretty decent resistance. Support long term still remains at 74. Dollar CAD as always was the most volatile story, and that's because we're really going back and forth now with Trump putting tariffs against Canada, which is almost unheard of, our biggest neighbor, our biggest trading partner. And that's really soured the market on the idea that we're going to come to any kind of an agreement on NAFTA. So it's going to become I think maybe contentious, a little bit more contentious. The fact that oil fell off the cliff as well didn't help dollar Canada. Although we do have a lot of Canadian data next week, and it's going to be very important for us to see how it performs. The Bank of Canada itself was relatively sanguine and actually quite hawkish in their determination to maintain a much more tighter monetary policy. Canadian economy has actually been able to survive all of this mayhem relatively well, but clearly geopolitical tension, not a great thing. If they can't come to terms on NAFTA, it's going to create a lot of perhaps temporary problems. Ultimately, I guess people will just work out ad hoc agreements, but generally, none of this stuff is really as advantageous for trade and economic growth as you would think. For Kiwi, there wasn't much on the calendar this week, and Kiwi sort of took a lot of profit taking as the week went by. Aussie Kiwi kind of gained a little bit ground and then sold off a little bit. But overall, it's pretty much stayed at the 70 level. 70 level is the big resistance point, and we'll see if it can barrel through here going forward. But it's difficult to see what on the calendar is going to push commodity dollars prices higher unless we can see commodity prices higher. As far as the calendar goes, there's not much data set except for Australia. Australia has a lot of data, but the question is it really going to matter? We have retail sales, we're bullish retail sales, that we followed up by the RBA statement, which basically is going to, I think, reaffirm for the 20th month in a row they're not going to move rates. And then after that, there's a trade balance data that comes up on Wednesday. And then we really end up the week, we don't have any Kiwi data at all. We end up the week with the Canadian employment data, which is going to be very important because then those numbers have been very hot pretty much for the last 3 or 4 months running. And that has been, I think, one of the key reasons why the Bank of Canada is getting decidedly more aggressive about tightening monetary policy. So if they confirm strong Canadian growth despite all of this political turbulence, that could provide a little bit of a boost for dollar Canada. This 131, 130 level has really been acting as a key resist. We'll see if those numbers can turn it around. But overall, as you can see here, it's just front of the week Australian data, back of the week Canadian data. That's really the COM dollar land as far as a data set goes. Not much really to drive us one way or the other. Let's take a look at the charts and see how everything lined up. So this is the weekly. And the weekly is kind of interesting because, while I said the Canadian dollars, the Australian dollars sold off, I think it was because my opinion was colored by the price action at the end of the week, because the front of the week was actually relatively strong, and you saw us get, the pair get bought up from the bottom here. So overall, if you look at the weekly candle here, 74 remains very, very clear support area. 4th week in a row that we've held that level. 76 certainly capping us to the upside, but it's possible for us to eke out perhaps beyond that. Certainly the price action looks modestly bullish with a series of higher lows. And there's nothing on the horizon except assuming we don't get bad data. If we get positive data, that could be enough to tip us over into the 76 land. But I don't think we go much beyond that. It's a very, very slow trade. There's very little interest, I think, to move the pair much one way or the other because it's essentially an equilibrium point, and it's about as good an example of equilibrium price as you can see here, where it's been 100 points for the last month because the market just feels it's pretty much fairly valued. Kiwi performed actually quite well, and again, I think my opinion of the weakness was just colored by today's price action because they were weaker against the dollar on the non-farm payrolls. But overall, the weekly also here showed that 68 held quite nicely, actually 69 held quite nicely, but this whole 68, 69 level is clear support. How much more push do we have to go up to the upside? remains to be seen. I think any of these rallies are going to be tempered. They're not the kind of rallies that we can see in the prior weeks, simply because the possibility of further U.S. rate hikes, I think, is going to cap any move to the upside. So perhaps maybe at best we move halfway the range towards the 71 level over the next couple of weeks. Hard to say, but definitely the momentum has shifted to the positive side. And if you're looking for lower volatility trades, the calm dollar trades could be an interesting low volatility trade here. So dollar CAD is the one exception because that's been very volatile because of all of the political news here. But what you do see on the weeklies here is that this 130 still continues to hold. As a matter of fact, we actually, let me go to the dailies. You can see how even off the positive U.S. non-farms, the 30 got very quickly rejected, really super quickly rejected, came back down. Last week dollar CAD was sort of my trade to the upside, and it worked initially. Basically, what was this? It worked mildly. We started around what was the low here? Almost near 30. We came up to about 30.50 for about 50 points, and then we had a massive reversal because the Bank of Canada was much more hawkish than anybody thought. But post Bank of Canada, the political fears kind of overtook it. I think the key thing here, if you're looking at Canada here, is if we don't break the highs here, if we break the highs here, that's a very negative sign. And that suggests that there's more weakness on the Canadian front. There's more political uncertainty, and the market could really take us to fresh multi-month highs beyond 31. As long as we stay underneath this 30, what is this? This is the 30.50 level. Let's say, yeah, as long as we stay below the 30.50 level on a closing basis on a daily basis, this remains a mild short. But it is I warn you that if it clears this level on a closing basis, that's a very bullish dollar CAD signal, very bearish Canadian dollar signal to the upside. So kind of interesting, I think, in some ways, because it certainly could set up a good trade. In the meantime, right now, I wouldn't want to take this trade because I don't see too much directionality either way. But this level is certainly a big threat to the shorts. And if it gets taken out, I think you're going to see a massive short covering to the upside. That's pretty much how the commodity dollar is set up. It's a sort of as usual, low volatility story with Canada being center. The most interesting part of that story. And it's really, in many ways, a function of just combination of both risk flows, either getting a little bit love to the Aussie and the Kiwi, as well as just the strength of the dollar next week. Is the market going to really rally around the consensus, maybe, that now we go to 4 rate hikes instead of 3 rate hikes as the U.S. economy continues to lead the pack in the G11 universe? Wish you guys the best luck, the best trading. Boris, over and out.